this invitation to give this talk, I was rather intimidated because if somebody had asked me to give a 5-year projection 2 years ago, I've obviously got it completely wrong. Right? So what I'd like to do is, and especially from a governance standpoint, focus on something not from a prediction standpoint, but from a certainty standpoint. And what I mean is transactions are a way of life. And certainly in the near future, they will remain as a way of life. So what I would like to do is focus the talk on digitizing transactions. So think of society, think of whatever we do from a transactions standpoint. It has a little bit of a sort of computer science algorithmic feel to it, so to speak, coming back to the first talk that we had. But think of everything we do through transactions. The experience is usually painful. I see lots of smiles coming up. There's friction, and that friction costs money, it wastes time, there's human error, and of course in numerous cases, human manipulation as well. So the objective is not to make such transactions frictionless. The question that I'd like to pose, and I'm going to intentionally sort of keep my presentation short and sort of hopefully open it for discussion, is how can we go from digitization to automation to innovation in a manner that we can actually create value from transactions. So it's not just that this was a painful transaction and now it is not a painful transaction, but let's try and stretch our imaginations a little bit to say not just that you removed something that was painful, but how do we actually create value out of it? Some examples of transactions. Right? Financial transactions, taxes, voting. If you're talking about governance, then voting is an integral part of our democratic process. Demarcation of physical assets like land. Some of these transactions we now conduct daily, some of them monthly, some of them quarterly, some of them within a year, some once in a couple of years, some of them perhaps once in a lifetime. So let's take an example, and this is an example that I'll take where IIT Madras, of course, played an important role, is the Mobile Payment Forum of India, which had academia, where IIT Madras played a key role, industry and regulators, much in the same way that we are here today. Slightly more than a decade ago, came together to say how can we create standards for interoperability, for security, for performance, for mobile payments in India, and this gave rise to two products. Initially, IMPS, which was the immediate payment service, which was more of a push-based transaction. And then in April 2016, we had the unified payment interface. It all came from the same mobile payment back-end architecture, which was both a push and a pull-based transaction. Just with this one transaction, let's see the impact that we've been able to create. So if you look at February 2020, and I'm saying February 2020 because it was 1 month before the pandemic, to February 2022, which is the last month. Transaction volume in crore, that's 132 crores to 450 crores. Transaction value in lakh crores per month. Went from 2.22 to 8.25. We are now transacting more than 100 billion US dollars a month. So in the calendar year 2022, UPI is expected to cross 1 trillion US dollars worth of transactions. And currently there are approximately 300 million active monthly users. I think the interesting thing, so if there's something that you want to get out of my talk, I think this would be one slide. Not so much in terms of the impact that it has created, but the value that is still left to be created. If you compare it with China, we are 1/3 the number of active monthly users. We're probably somewhere between 5x and 7x less than the worth of transactions that are being conducted at this point of time. As the number of users increase, as the number of use cases increase, as the volume of data increases, there is a tremendous amount of value that is yet to be uncovered, and this is frankly just the tip of the iceberg. So innovation is needed at least at 3 levels. At the level of adoption, at the level of technology, and at the level of policy. Adoption, users, and merchants. So there's been a lot of mention about understanding use cases and human technology interface. So we need a better understanding of human behavior, technology, and use case. And from a merchant standpoint, the question about setting the merchant discount rate has always oscillated between making it free, making it zero, which is at this point of time, to 4 or 5 years ago, where the norm was, yes, we should actually be charging for it, right? There should be actually a merchant discount rate. From a technology standpoint, numerous examples, but here is one. Can we actually start using voice as a means of authentication and conducting transactions across multiple local languages? So Sujata mentioned, we're beginning to start using voice. Why can't we start using voice for our transactions, at least for filling in all the data? Right? I want to pay X 10 rupees, all of that is there, and then perhaps I just put in my MPIN. And as there is maturity and acceptance of voice as a medium of dealing with my payment app, perhaps the authentication piece can actually come in as well. An enormous amount of research has to come in, where academia comes in. As soon as we have this level of confidence, you can obviously start using voice for almost all transactions. At a policy level, the government has a phenomenally rare opportunity to develop a completely data-centric understanding of how the economy conducts itself and uses money, and can actually set taxes accordingly. A completely data-centric view of taxation. Completely data-centric view. So if you're looking at value addition, you're not looking at it, let's say at a human level and the government level. You're not saying at a human level you say, I've reduced the friction, and at a government level you say, I've reduced cash. That's not value addition. That's the sort of plain vanilla benefit of it. The value addition from a human level is, can the payments usage data and patterns help to customize financial services at scale? What works for me individually? Can it actually make it easier and more beneficial for paying taxes? At a government level, can one use this instrument to help widen the tax base and also have better resource allocation given spending patterns? And with technologies like artificial and blockchain, the opportunities for value addition, frankly, are enormous. And UPI is just one service, just one transaction. And by the way, Google has actually made a recommendation to the US Fed that they should adopt a UPI-like system. And this news is about 10 days old. So if you just went to Google and typed in UPI Global, you find that Nepal is the first country to actually adopt UPI, India's UPI system. Can we now think of greater engagement with democracy? Given that the larger scope of today's conversation is around governance. Transactions on a mobile a couple of times a day. This is our money. We're comfortable with it now. More than a decade ago when these conversations were happening, there were all sorts of pushes and pulls. I mean, today we take it for granted. But more than a decade ago, there were all sorts of pushes and pulls on how this will not work, how people will not be comfortable with this, how they will da-di-da-di-da-di-da. But it's happening today. That would obviously have greater participation. That would have lower cost, right? So just the way, so if I could use the analogy, extend the analogy or stretch the imagination of the analogy that Bhaskar was using, he was saying, look, we've got connectivity, but where are the devices? You can say, well, I have the ability to vote, but are there people who I actually want to vote for? Well, that's a different story altogether. Right? At least going from your 65 to 75% voter turnout, there's no reason not to have near 100% voter turnout. Doesn't matter where people are. Right? Well, this last slide I don't think I really need to have, which is how to systematically create value from transactions, which would be using the example, for example, of the Mobile Payment Forum of India, where academia, industry, and government can come together, develop standards and technology, go to market, set policy. But the key thing is that this ecosystem should work in tandem for an end-to-end.